Hey there, guys. Welcome to another episode of the Schiz and Giggles podcast. My name is Cody. I live with schizophrenia.
My name's Kit, and I live with schizoaffective disorder.
And there are a lot of misconceptions and myths out there about schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder. So today, we're going to talk about some of those myths and try to correct some of those conversations that are currently happening because these are things that we hear every day. These are also things that Kit and I get in our comment sections every single day. So, I'm going to let Kit get started here. We're going to go back and forth. Kit, what is one of the most common myths that you hear about schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder?
I can start with one that actually includes both of them, and it's that they are the same. So, this
Mm,
is one that I get a lot in my comments, specifically in the form of people saying, I have schizophrenia as opposed to having schizoaffective disorder. And so, it's because a lot of people do actually think they're the same thing because they both have schizo in the words.
yeah, this is one that I get a lot more in the form of a question, actually. A lot of people, when I mention my mom's diagnosis, which she's diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, they will ask, what is the difference between the two? As someone who grew up with a mom with schizoaffective, I was really shocked that that a lot of people didn't know the difference, and I'm sure that's got to be like that's the diagnosis you live with. So were you shocked when you saw that, or like I know schizophrenia is probably more widely known as a diagnosis, but were you at all like confused when you started making content and you started seeing those comments?
I mean, in a way, yes, but also in a way, no, because for me, I always had a mood aspect to it. So when the schizo got added to my diagnosis of schizoaffective, I was just like, oh, it's just mood and psychosis. I
Mhm.
didn't realize that a lot of people, again, they just see schizo and they think schizophrenia. And it's very frustrating to me because for me the mood disorder aspect of my condition is the most stressful, the most disruptive, that kind of thing with it. And so yeah, the fact that they people think they're the same, it's incorrect. And I'm not going to go too deep into the details because one of our earliest episodes of this podcast covers the difference between the two. But that's all of it in a nutshell.
Yeah, and that's like Kit said, a very common one. And if you want to learn more and you haven't listened to episode 2, I believe, that is where we break down the entire episode about the difference between schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder. So check that out if you want to hear more of our take on this. Another myth that I hear a lot is that people with schizophrenia can't work, right? And this is another one I've talked about in the past. After I was diagnosed, I had a doctor tell me that I would never be able to work again because I couldn't hold down a job with schizophrenia. And he said I should get used to being on disability because I wasn't going to be able to perform in a traditional workplace. So, this is one I hear all the time. And little plug here, I did just write a book about this. So, Minds Over Meetings
Woo!
is my book. Thank you so much. This is something I talked a lot about in my book was how frustrating it was to be told by a doctor that I would never be able to work again. So not only do we hear it as people living with schizophrenia spectrum disorders from our loved ones and from people in our lives, but when actual doctors and medical professionals are saying it, it gets really discouraging. It makes it hard to realize that with the right help and medication, we can do those things. Kit's a really good example of someone who gets to kind of live out, a really cool job that you probably didn't think was going to be necessarily possible after your diagnosis. And although it's not the job you thought you'd have, it's still in the same area. So that's I think really important to recognize because I don't know if you ever heard that early on in your diagnosis, but I kept being told that I wouldn't be able to work.
I was actually told by the psychiatrist that diagnosed me with all of my mental illnesses that I could do anything I put my mind to, and that my mental
God, I love
illness
good psychiatrists.
yeah, but yeah, and he told me I could do anything, even though I was slowly becoming more cognitively, I was experiencing that cognitive decline. So that was really kind of him, and that really helped me. And yes, I did not end up a doctor. I did end up a scientist, though, which is fun. But I would actually say that this myth causes me a lot of problems on my channel because I get comments of people saying that I'm not actually schizoaffective because I can work. I'm not actually mentally ill because I can
Yeah.
work. And recently I made a lot of videos about myself when I was in hypomania, in psychosis, and in psychotic depression. And I had people accuse me of faking because I was able to go to work through all of it.
Yeah.
So it's very It's very important to me to show that while, yes, there is a significant group of people that cannot work because of their disorder, there's also a lot of us that can. And people like to focus on the people that can't more than the people that can, and then devalidate the people that can. And it's just a toxic situation in a lot of ways. And so a lot of people in these high level positions, whether they be executives, CEOs, etc., they can have schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder, and they probably just don't talk about it because of the stigma and other things that are associated with it. So people with those disorders can have jobs and go through their life perfectly fine, having a 9 to 5 with the disorder.
Yeah, and I also early on in my content creating got a lot of those comments as well. People being
Mhm.
like, "Oh, well, you work, so you don't have schizophrenia, or you work, so your schizophrenia must not be that bad," which is so invalidating to what I've been through and what I've worked through and what I've been able to accomplish. But I think we see the statistics around schizophrenia and work, right? Like it is a high percentage of people who are unable to. What we forget is some of that is on employers and on workplaces for not being willing to
Yes.
accommodate.
Yes.
We put all of the blame on people with schizophrenia. And I can't tell you the amount of comments I've gotten being like, oh, people with schizophrenia don't want to work. People with schizophrenia are lazy. People would accuse me of that before they realized that I had a job most of the time when I was getting those comments. And so it, for me, is really frustrating because I know that more people with schizophrenia want to work and can't find workplaces that are able to accommodate them or willing to accommodate them. So let's keep that in mind while we're having this conversation. If you're talking about schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder in the workplace, we need to also be having the conversation about the workplaces and the employers and HR and the managers. They're the ones deciding whether or not someone's going to be able to have a place long term in a workplace, despite still maybe having symptoms or having cognitive delays.
And it is an important conversation to have. And the more we talk about it, the more normalized this type of stuff will become. And maybe people with schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder that would not otherwise be able to have a job can finally have one day.
Exactly.
So the next myth is kind of in a similar vein. It's that you can't live a full life with schizophrenia. And this one is one that kind of gets to me a little bit because it's something I try to do in my content and in my real life is to do things, do wild things, do impulsive things sometimes when it's appropriate. Just kind of get out there and live a life that I believe is worth living.
Mhm.
And it's very frustrating to have people say, well, you can't live a full life with this disorder. When in reality, I've decided that I can and I have and I do. And I think that the fact that this myth exists, that people are telling me these things, means that there are people with schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder that are being told that they will never live a full life. Just like they're being told that they can't work, they're being told that they can't live a full life. And so they're being put into this box. And I just think that's so unfair and so mean and so cruel in a way because the illness will it's going to be there. It's always going to be there. But you can choose to take life by the horns anyway, if that makes sense. And so sometimes I do things that are a little more risky when it comes to my illness. Like I'll do a high stress event. Like I go to anime conventions and comic conventions. I'll do one of those, and that's a high stress situation. There's always a risk that there's going to be symptoms that result after that. But I choose to do it anyway because I believe in living life. And so
Yeah.
telling people that they can't live full lives because of mental illness, it just gets to me a little bit.
Yeah. This is one that, I've gotten ever since I posted my very first video on TikTok. And it's one that I hear because a lot of people don't have experience with someone living with schizophrenia, right? Not everyone has a relative, friend, or family member who has this diagnosis. So it's hard for them to imagine someone being able to function in a life with the symptoms that we experience. The thing that really doesn't help, and I've talked about this a dozen times, and I'll talk about it 100 times more as long as we do this podcast. movies, TV shows,
Yep,
media
yep,
don't
yep.
portray us well. They don't portray us as people living full and functional lives. Uh, and it's really frustrating. It's hard to combat that, right? Because we're working against years of this idea being pushed that we are either going to end up in a psychiatric facility or we're going to be, fully disabled for forever. And maybe there was a time where that was true, when we didn't have medication, we didn't have treatment. I think it says a lot that when I started posting content, a lot of the comments I got were people fake claiming. They were telling me I was faking, like you just mentioned, because you had a job. For me, literally seeing a person who could communicate and be living a regular life and have a relationship and have a wife. Literally, I've had people tell me that I can't be a person living with schizophrenia because I'm married or because I've been able to manage relationships or I've been able to learn how to communicate properly again or I don't show as much of the cognitive decline that is still there. I've just managed to like learn how to uh, properly, you know, uh, be able to explain my diagnosis and my journey. I think it says a lot where if someone sees someone like me living with schizophrenia, it's easier for them to believe that I'm faking than it is for them to believe that I'm living a full, happy life and I'm married and I'm working and I'm traveling. It's easier for them to picture me as someone without an illness trying to play an illness than as someone living with it, which is so crazy to me, but that's the world we currently live in. And I honestly think that one might be one of the biggest myths that I see because what's different between this one and the rest of them? Even people who, with the best intentions, are caregivers, doctors, stuff like that, some of them even believe this. Like they're still under the mindset that even with treatment and medication, we won't be able to live normal lives. And I think that says a lot when it's the people in the community who also believe it. And not everyone. I'm not trying to call out like every single person who's a caregiver or a clinician, but there are still people in those groups who talk like that and who really make it seem like it's kind of the end for someone after a diagnosis.
And it's so frustrating because people who have those that believe this myth in their life, it'll kind of push them down a bit and then they don't believe it. And if
Yeah.
they don't believe it, then it might not happen. And that's really that's really saddening to me.
Yeah. Well, and especially when you're first diagnosed, like you trust your caregivers, you trust your doctors. So when a doctor told me I'd never work, I'm like, okay, well, that must be fact because I
Mhm.
trust this person with my care. And so it's really hard to dig yourself out of that. And I think we need hope more than anything. And being so quick to tell someone they won't be able to do something, I just don't think that's helping anyone. It's not helping patients. It's not helping caregivers. It's just it's really disruptive, I think, to our community and people that are recovering right now. So stop that. stop saying that. Which this brings me to maybe my least favorite of the myths out there, which is that people with schizophrenia are inherently violent. So the thought process is literally anyone with this diagnosis is somehow a danger to themselves or others. I get this. People will tell me I shouldn't have my service dog because they're afraid I'm going to harm her. A lot of people have posted things about, my wife shouldn't be living with me because I'm going to end up being violent and hurting her. And I think what makes me so mad about this is I'm not only a patient, I'm a caregiver, right? And so growing up, when people would hear that my mom had schizoaffective disorder, or they would assume that she was dangerous. Like that was the first assumption is that my mom was somehow dangerous. And even as a kid, it confused me because I didn't see a dangerous person. I saw someone who was scared and confused and just literally needed help understanding what was going on. She never at one point hurt me or made me feel unsafe. There were situations that I definitely didn't feel safe, but it was because we didn't have resources, we didn't have the things we needed to survive comfortably, not because of her diagnosis. Now, the thing I always hear is, well, people with schizophrenia can commit horrible crimes or can hurt people. And my response to that is always, so do neurotypical people. Like, I don't understand that argument. It's unfair to assume that just because someone has an illness, they're automatically dangerous. And I don't know if this is one you get as much. So I feel like I get a lot of this because I'm a very big guy and I'm covered in tattoos, and I feel like if you ran into me in a dark alley, I might look a little intimidating. So I feel like I get this one a lot. Whereas you, I would imagine it's hard for people to believe that with you. Not that you're not scary, kid. I want to give you your props here. If you're going for intimidating, it's not working for you. Is
God
what I'm
dang.
trying to say.
God dang it.
But is that one you get a lot, or do you just like? I imagine you still hear it, but do people say that about you?
I do get it. I do get it sometimes. It's not a common thing I get, but I do have people say that I shouldn't be allowed to take care of my guinea pigs, for example. And I'm like, oh, they're my little babies. What are you talking about? And then there's some people that say I shouldn't live alone because I'm a danger to society. I get that one. But it's not a daily thing. I don't get them very often, which is good. So
Yeah, it must be the neck tattoos that really pushes it over the edge for me, because
give
I
me a
get
few
those
years.
all the time. Yeah, yeah. That's I think the dangerous thing about this one is we hear it all the time, and this goes back to TV shows, movies, and media, right? Because every time a person with schizophrenia is on the news, it's not look at Kit and the amazing life she's living despite schizophrenia. It's not look at this person with schizophrenia who just wrote a book. It's always a person with schizophrenia was hallucinating and committed a horrible crime, because it's easy to sensationalize those things. And I think that's why people associate it in their brains. Like, we associate schizophrenia to serial killers. Like, I can't tell you the amount of TV shows or documentaries I've been watching, and the person that ended up doing it has schizophrenia, or they speculate that the person had schizophrenia. And unfortunately, that's just become hand in hand with this diagnosis. I do think it's important to acknowledge that people with schizophrenia are more likely to be the victim of violent crimes than to commit violent crimes. And that is a fairly well known statistic that, every time I hear people talking about schizophrenia and violence, I try to mention. And that's not just schizophrenia, that's all mental illness, I'm pretty sure. So keep that in mind. But that's one that I get all the time, and I know it's really common in our community. And I will even have people go as far as telling me that I shouldn't be allowed in public because of this diagnosis. So that's one I feel like I could talk all day about. But I know we still have one more. So, Kit, what is the last myth?
The final myth is one that I do get a lot, actually. And it's that schizophrenia is the same as dissociative identity disorder or DID.
If I had $1 for every time that someone made a DID reference on my page or in my comments section, we wouldn't even need to be doing this podcast right now. I could fully fund schizophrenia research by myself with that money.
Yeah, DID is a complex condition that is a personality disorder, meaning that it's not a biological based thing like how schizophrenia and schizoaffective are. So it's already separate in that sense. It's a separate diagnosis according to the DSM-5, the diagnostic textbook that most of us are diagnosed with. And it's so far off that it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
But with me and my experience with it is that a lot of the myth in my comments comes from the fact that I hear internal auditory hallucinations, which means I hear
Yes.
them in the inner head space, same place as you might find thoughts or an internal monologue.
I'm going to credit you for this. You are the person who taught me a lot about internal hallucinations.
Oh.
So, uh when I started making content, I actually thought that hallucinations could only be external. So I learned that a lot from your content. There are some other creators who talk about it, but you went really in depth when I first found you, and that's how I learned more about it. And so early on, that's how I always kind of separated my experience with DID, was that I hear external hallucinations, like it's happening
Oh.
outside. So, like, without having internal hallucinations, because that's not something I experience, um it was really easy for me to explain the difference, but like learning more about internal auditory hallucinations, I've had to like kind of be able to explain it a little bit better. So like basically the short snippet that I always give people is people with schizophrenia live with hallucinations, delusions, paranoid thoughts, and other symptoms like that. And it's usually based on a combination of genetics and environmental factors. People with DID have multiple alters. So DID was actually reclassified from what used to be known as multiple personality disorder after they realized that it didn't really explain or adequately define the symptoms that people experience. This disorder, like Kit said, usually comes from a very different background. And a lot of the times you see it from trauma response, and it's not at all experienced the same way. So when people experience this, it's not like they're hearing like what I experience, voices outside of my own thoughts. It's essentially multiple alters. A lot of the times, like I said, because of trauma response, it's the brain's way of protecting the person who's suffering. So it's not at all the same diagnosis. The only thing that I think keeps people from confusing these two is that schizophrenia, if you actually look up the definition, means split mind, right? Like that's where I think people get held up and they think of movies. Once again, this comes back to movies, TV shows, and media not portraying mental illness well. They see old movies that feature schizophrenia, but it's actually someone living with what used to be known as multiple personality disorder and is now known as DID. So a lot of the misconception I think comes from the confusion in the name. Like the original name schizophrenia came from a split mind, and then movies and TV shows feed into this a lot by not adequately explaining the difference between the two diagnoses. So this is one that I think, as much advocacy as we do, we're going to hear this for a long time because, in my opinion, I think DID might be more misunderstood than schizophrenia. And I say that because, like, I've worked with a few DID creators. I see a lot more stigmatizing comments on their videos, and I see a lot of people who just aren't willing to understand it. And there's a lot more fake claiming that comes along with that diagnosis. There's a lot more stuff I see that people deal with when it comes to DID and advocacy. So I know you had mentioned before we started recording that you've worked with people with DID in the past too, and this is something I would love to explore on a future episode because Kit and I are not by any means DID experts,
Yeah, we
and
are
that's why
not
I'm
doctors. Please don't sue us.
yeah, we are not doctors. Please don't sue us. And I do think it's really important that we bring someone on to talk about the differences because it's still really misunderstood. And even as a mental health advocate, I can't sit here and break it all down for you guys because there's a lot that even I don't understand. And I'm sure Kit would say the same.
Yeah, and a lot of my comments, like I said before, with internal auditory hallucinations, people usually hear their alters internally. It's more that people are saying that I have DID. I don't have schizoaffective disorder.
Because you have the internal
Yes.
hallucination. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's another comment I get with it.
Yeah. So this is something that I would love to explore more, and I think is a really interesting topic. But
Mhm.
it is a very misunderstood diagnosis, and I think there's a long way of understanding it that we need to go. So at the end of the day, I think this is a good topic for the future. I would love to have a guest on about this. We're not going to go too much more into this, but that is a really common misconception, and I see this a lot. I think this also would go hand in hand with BPD being confused with
Yes, yes,
bipolar disorder.
yes,
That's a
absolutely.
really common one. So,
Yeah.
all stuff we could talk about on future episodes. But I would love to hear from you guys if you have any other common myths. I would love to do a part two of this because I know that there are more myths out there. We just picked the most common ones we hear. I know that we missed some, and I know that you guys are going to have some really good ideas for if we do another episode of this. So please let us know down in the comments. Kit, do you have any other myths or anything that you want to dispel before we end the episode today?
We're not demons. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. Believe it or not, we are not demonically possessed.
All right, guys.
It's crazy to me we have to say that. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. That's but yeah, we do. We do have to say that.
All right, guys. If you want to reach out to us to contact us about guest suggestions, ideas for episodes, any of that, we are Skits and Giggles on Instagram and TikTok. That is skits like schizophrenia and all spelled out, and giggles like, well, giggles. And if you don't want to do that, you can also reach out to us via email. We are skitsandgiggles@gmail.com. And do be sure to like the show, rate the show, drop a comment, do all that good stuff to let us know what you think.
Thank you guys again so much for watching and listening. Kit, what are the final words for the people today?
Guys, remember, the brain is a minefield and we brought flip flops.